Coffey. I'm the head of strategic partnerships at GasBuddy. Very briefly, GasBuddy is the third most used travel app in the US on both iOS and Android, helping millions of drivers find the perfect pit stop. That's enough about GasBuddy. Download the app, check it out. It's very cool. But data Schmata, we're going to have a conversation around data. A little bit about my background, not necessarily intending to share my entire resume with you, just a little snippet. But why I'm sharing my background with you is that I've been in media for over 20 years. It's kind of scary to admit that. But the conversation around data is clearly not a new one. When I spent half of my media career in the European market and about half in the US market. And from my earliest days in the radio business, when we go back to Nielsen, data's always been a part of the conversation. We've always been collecting listenership, viewership, readership data, and then working with various quantitative and qualitative partners, trying to find what we call in the industry relevant business reasons to connect with specific brands, trying to sell them into our customer base. So the conversation around data is most certainly not a new one, but what has changed is the explosion in the total amount of data available. So before we talk about the data, let's talk about the facts. While certainly the world is changing, I'm going to probably propose that it's not changing as fast as you think, and it hasn't changed as much as you think. I've probably taken a little bit of a contrarian position in this presentation because I'm very excited each and every morning when I get up and I read the headlines and I look at where we're going with big data and electric cars and trips to Mars. But then it's a little bit different when I come back and actually look at where we are currently. So a couple of quick and interesting points that I'm going to share with you that are going to demonstrate, despite the very exciting conversation around big data and that companies today have all the data in the world on everybody, the truth is that they don't. There's still pretty significant gaps in the data available on customers. And I'm going to touch on a couple of interesting topics that demonstrate that offline behavior is still such a huge size that the online data will give you interesting insights, but you have to find ways to bridge the gap. So the first thing is yes, there's been huge audience erosion, particularly in print and radio. I spent a long time in radio. I still love the medium. However, TV, by the way, is going through, I think, somewhat of a renaissance. There are more Americans today watching more TV than ever before. And when you look at time spent, more than half of the average consumer's time spent is still in traditional media as opposed to online. So clearly, our attention has gone en masse online, but traditional media is still a dominant force in where people spend their time. The other thing is, and the first time I saw this number, I couldn't believe it, and I think every time I've seen this number since, I have to go back and double check it. 93% of all consumer purchases still happen offline. So again, when I wake up and I read the headlines, I'm very excited about what's going on in the digital space. I'm very excited about what's going on in the e-commerce space. I spent 5 years with an e-commerce company called Rulala, and it truly was extraordinary for me to see how we went from zero to over $500 million worth of revenue, very much in a mobile-first fashion. But again, as exciting as and extraordinary as that growth was, when you actually look at where consumers are spending the time, where the vast majority of their purchases, it's still offline. And what's further fascinating about that is that when you think that, okay, currently, it's clear that all of the growth in retail is going to happen online, but currently only 7% of all consumer purchases are online. And then I also think it's phenomenal, and it's an interesting fact that almost half of all that purchasing in the US is on one single platform. So I think that's great for Amazon, and by the way, I'm an Amazon Prime member, but we're definitely entering an area of the winners take all. So then talking about, near and dear to GasBuddy, talking about spaces that don't make the headlines. GasBuddy is a dominant force in the convenience and fuel business, and it's not a particularly sexy business. Yes, yet when I first came into that space, I couldn't believe that it was a $600 billion business. That's about 50% bigger than the entire e-commerce business in the US. So when you think of your neighborhood, when you think of where you're gassing up each morning or every evening going to and from work, that convenience store and gas station is doing extraordinarily more business and more commerce and serving more people than you would probably be aware. So clearly, those couple of quick facts demonstrate that the growth in online has been extraordinary. Actually, just walking around NASDAQ here, looking at the various IPO dates of Amazon and Google, and wishing I'd bought all that stock at that time. But there are pretty significant gaps from online to offline. So some of what I'm going to talk about today is, number one, near and dear to GasBuddy hearts is location data. I'm going to spend a bit of time about how location data very, very quickly, particularly because of pretty significant improvements in accuracy. Accuracy has been an issue in this space for a very long time. Location data is something we've been talking about for a very long time, but really we're now entering the first period where it's usable, sensible data. The other one is your party, my party, where's the party? I feel like every time I sit down and start looking at first-party data, second-party data, third-party data, I can't figure out whose party I'm at. So I'm in the business, and I spend all my time talking about first-party, second-party, third-party, and I find I get confused on what's what. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about whose party we're at, and also which party is the best party. The other one is insight to impact. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the three sort of significant challenges, and I think the third is the biggest one. The first one is most companies haven't even identified all of their own first-party data, so that's a huge challenge. The second one is second-party data, huge opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge on who should I partner with, where can I get it. And then once you have all that data, by the way, then you've got to actually go and sort and analyze and figure out what insights you can get. And then you have an insight. Now, what the hell do I do with the insight? So going from insight to impact, I actually think will be the single hardest hurdle to overcome of the three hurdles. And then I'll also, again, a little bit of a contrarian position, spend a little bit of time being excited about mass automation and mass standardization in the digital space. But I also think there are major cons to it as well. So I think we've got some suggestions. So talking about the power of location. So I'll try not to reference GasBuddy too much, but I will where it makes sense. GasBuddy's had 70 million downloads to date, 100% organic downloads. We pace at about 25,000 downloads each and every day. And it's an always-on app. For the app to work, for it to do what it does for the customer, it needs to know where you are. So we get a very, very significant amount of location data. And again, this goes back, this is my first example of first-party and second-party data. And once we recognize the extraordinary number of location data and trip data that we had on a very large percentage of the American driving audience, we had to figure out how do we collect, how do we sort, how do we analyze, how do we generate insights. And we partnered with a company called Cubic that I'll talk a little bit about in a second, because when I go back to my days in traditional media, demographic data is where it's at. And by the way, it's still where it's at. I mean, the amount of RFPs that I have worked on in the last 3 months, 6 months, year, and 2 years that still use primary demographic and household income is still pretty significant. Excited about where we're going, but where we are is not as sophisticated as some of the headlines and maybe some of the speakers might suggest. And we used to joke with demographic data. Nearly every RFP that would come across our desk was for 25 to 54. And we used to joke, is that a demographic or a family reunion? So again, once you have demographic data, you have online, the online data that we do have is pretty compelling. Search data, for anybody that hasn't read the book, I just finished it, Everybody Lies. I strongly recommend it because I think search data gives great insight to what buying cycles people are entering into, things that they're searching, and then psychographic data. But when you append location data to all the different pools of data that you have against specific segments, specific cohorts, the insight and the clarity that it gives is extraordinary. I think it was Paco Underhill, Why People Buy, a great book that said you cannot measure what people say they do, only what they do, and there's always a huge difference. And it's fascinating to us that anytime we look at declared or inferred data against a specific cohort, and then we go back to do a little bit of matching and a little bit of understanding against location data, it's fascinating that who you think you are and who you might tell people you are is often very different from the behavior that we see. One of the great examples of that was Netflix, which is a data monster. They originally used to analyze what people would go in and save movies that they were going to watch later. And of course, these were all documentaries and world history and very highbrow stuff. And then Netflix would be very surprised when they'd turn around and you're watching Fast and Furious 7. So they quickly got out of watching what you intended to watch and quickly got into just focusing on what you were actually watching and then making recommendations based on what you were actually watching. So again, location data, we have learned at GasBuddy, and we're demonstrating with our brand partners, that location intelligence is probably one of the biggest and best signals for people's preferences. So again, there's a little bit of a map here that sort of gives a sense of the level of clarity that you can have. And again, just stepping back with GasBuddy, again, there's no personally identifiable information. You know, one of the things about data is the transparency element is really, really important. You have to be very upfront with consumers on what you're doing, what data you're collecting. It's absolutely critical. You might think, why would I let anybody track what I'm doing based on my phone's location? And to be perfectly honest, I'm the type of person that's gone into the settings on my phone, and I've turned all the ones off that provide no value or service to me, and I've left the ones on where there's a great value exchange. So if I were to show you my phone right now, I am delighted to have Google Maps know my location. I'm delighted to have Waze know my location. I'm delighted to have GasBuddy know my location. So there's no creepiness or scariness. No, they are, I'm not going to mention any names because there are some recently that have been sort of caught with their hand in the cookie jar, a couple of bad actors that have been doing some nefarious things about not being upfront about tracking and collecting data. And again, a big part of the reason that we partnered with Cubic. But again, when we look at, when we identify the cohort of sort of, an example, Starbucks' most heaviest visitors, people that we know that are going there, and we're looking at their dwell time. We not only know that they went there, we know how long they actually stay there. Dwell time is a really, really important thing for increasing the overall accuracy of the data. And then you start seeing patterns with the segments and cohorts that Starbucks goers. There's a great correlation between Starbucks and Macy's, but a very quick example of how you can start gaining extraordinary insight. And when you now start appending this data to someone's online behavior, then it really is a game changer. So one of the things here as well about just the insights, I want to spend a little bit of time on segmentation. So the first thing is that the pre-planning of a campaign. I'm so excited at GasBuddy right now that every time we're working with the brand or we have an RFP or whatever we're doing, we can actually, the first thing we do is we go to our Cubic dashboard and we say, what affinity do our customers have for this brand based on actual visits currently? It's an extraordinary insight. Is our audience relevant to this brand? Can this brand speak to their customers on our platform? And we can see that instantly, not by sort of qualitative research, but by actual visits, which is a big game changer. The other one is time and location. If you were to think of QSR, the idea that we can look at a customer that's going to a coffee brand at 8 to 9 every single morning to get a coffee, but never comes back in at any other day part. But we know from trip data that that person is driving right on by at lunchtime. The idea that you can serve a specific message based on time and location to someone that you already know as your customer is huge. The other one is conquesting. The great thing with location data is you can literally run a campaign where someone's in your category, they're shopping your competitor. By the way, everybody knows today that the only way to get business today is to take it away from somebody else. So aggressive. And the idea that location data can, at the right time and the right location, work a campaign to see if you can get someone to turn left to brand A instead of right to brand B is really exciting. So it's basically, who are my customers, who are in my category, but they're not shopping me, and then also proximity, which is, hey, let me go along here. So the first thing with data, again, I'll talk a lot about headlines because the headlines and the articles and seminars like this get me very, very excited. But the realities of when I'm back working with an agency or in a brand, and I actually look at how a campaign has been bought, how the campaign has been judged, if it's successful, then while the promise of data is extraordinary, the current reality is that some brands have this really figured out and most don't. Only 6% of marketers believe they get a complete view of their customers from all available data sources. So almost all CMOs that participated in the new CMO Council study just in March already realized that, hey, I know, I imagine, I expect there's a lot of data out there on my customer. I haven't even figured out my first-party data, which is the data I have about this customer, because it most often exists in so many various silos within the organization. Most businesses haven't even figured out how to bring all that data together in the first place. 43% of marketers believe they're missing the ability to transform their data into real-time action. It's a little bit of a bold statement because the amount of real-time campaigns. So, for example, on the Cubic platform, you can test various creative, and you can, on the fly, change the creative based on what's influencing someone's visits or not. However, the total current number of campaigns that are leveraging this are really, really small. So again, while the world is changing, it's not changing as fast as we think. It hasn't changed as much as we think. So I think for both brands and agencies alike, what's that Chinese saying? The two best times to plant a tree, 20 years ago and today. It's still sort of day one in data, and there's plenty of opportunity. So again, your party, where's the party, and my party is first party is your party. It's your data on your customers that are interacting with your business. By the way, not just online. Particularly in the convenience and retail space. Again, it's a $600 billion space. And, I first remember when I came from Ireland to the USA straight off the boat, I was expecting things to be so much more progressive and so much more sophisticated. And I was a little bit surprised to see that it wasn't. And here I am in 2017. And again, the conversations, the headlines, and the articles are very exciting. But the reality of how we're buying media and what targeting and what data we're using is currently still largely pretty unsophisticated. And the first unsophistication is around your own data. We work with customers that haven't even connected POS data, purchasing at a physical location, and credit card data back with online data. So there's still a huge challenge for companies, number one, to identify where all the different silos of data in my business, where I'm collecting, browsing data, buying data, abandoned cart data, media consumption data, purchase data, and there are many companies that are really still behind the eight ball in identifying where that data is and being able to collect it and then analyze it and gain interesting insights. So by far and away, the most important data is first-party data, and for anybody who hasn't figured out or mastered that, I would do that before you get to any other conversation about second-party data or third-party data. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. So again, when you look at the reach and quality, of course the first-party, now maybe if you're Amazon, the reach is a little bit different on the first-party data based on what we've learned. But again, it's a sort of quality and reach. First-party data is going to be your most valuable. It's going to be the most significant set of insights on your current customers. Second-party data, which I'll talk about more in a second, are the partners who are also your customers' customers, if that makes sense. We often get into this little funnel where we just think of our customers as our customers, and they don't really exist in any other form or fashion outside of that. But when you think of an airline company partnering with a hotel company, leveraging each set of first-party data to create second-party data insights, there have been some extraordinary campaigns and amazing results that have been generated for that. And then location data, particularly because such as our partner Cubic, and we spent a long time at GasBuddy doing due diligence on this based on who are the best partners in the space, who are the most accurate, who are the most ethical, and also who at scale. Because if you can't do this at scale, then truly it's not going to be extraordinarily meaningful, particularly to the big brands. So location data is extraordinarily high in quality, but it does offer pretty significant reach. And then I'm not going to spend too much time talking about third-party data, because I think third-party data, it's there, we're using it. I think, if I can say, the state of performance in the digital ecosystem and the numbers of people that engage with click-on ads might suggest that. The other thing is insight to impact. Data and insights don't guarantee impact. So the first thing is that most companies are struggling to sort of identify and collect their own data. Most companies are somewhat struggling to really be very close with a second data party partner and build truly meaningful campaigns. And part of that is around the sort of mass automation and mass standardization of the campaign. There's some sort of belief, or a lot of conversations that I hear, that every conversation around data means that we're talking about programmatic, we're talking about automation, we're talking about standardization. And I actually think the complete opposite is true, because some of the insight to impact instances that I've seen have literally been business-changing moments. I can remember back at Rue La La, just thinking of one or two examples, because we could clearly see what people were browsing, we could clearly see what people were buying, and we actually had brands that opened locations in other parts of the country where they didn't believe they really had customers, but they saw mass customers from specific locations engage, browse, purchase their brand. I won't mention the brands, but I remember at one point there used to be this little sort of data report that we gave that showed here's all the units that you sold, and by the way, these customers purchased your product. Here's other products that they have a great affinity to. And on one particular occasion, there was a whole partnership line of clothing that was launched based on that insight. So the other thing with platform mindset is that I think it's very important to look at where the data was collected from and what mindset the customer was in when they were interacting with that platform. I'm a big proponent of the type of if you collect interesting data on Facebook about people on Facebook and their behavior on Facebook, then I actually believe that whatever insight to action, whatever that action is served back to the customer, I think that's best on Facebook. You know, Facebook, a little bit like research, is not a projection of who we are, but who we like the world to think we are. So that's a particular mindset, right? Because again, I just recently came back from a trip to Greece, and I was posting pictures like bandwidth didn't allow. But I won't post pictures again maybe till next year, till I'm somewhere cool, but people think I make trips like that all the time. The other one is beyond the banner. And I'm very, very passionate about this. At GasBuddy, a significant portion of our revenue is programmatic. Many of the other companies I've worked with, a significant portion of the revenue is programmatic. And if you want to buy lots of banner ads, programmatic is a game changer. It makes it easy. It just doesn't necessarily make it better or more efficient. So when I look at all of the campaigns over the course of my career that performed the best, that we were most proud of, that were press-worthy, that won awards, none of them had banner ads. They were all sort of native integrated marketing campaigns where the brand's branding, imaging, and messaging is integrated into the very fabric of the consumer experience. When we look at GasBuddy and we pull out our various case studies, when an agency or a brand says, hey, send me your case studies, all of our case studies are when we were belly to belly with the agency and or the brand, working on a content-driven conversation, not a conversation that we spent years getting this data. We spent significant time analyzing the data. We've spent significant time generating the insight. We now have the broadest, most colorful canvas on the consumer that we've ever had. And by the way, could you put that into a little tiny box on a little tiny phone? So again, it's not to say that banner ads are bad, but I do want to rail against the idea that big data, great insights should automatically lead someone into a conversation about mass standardization, IAB ad units, particularly in a mobile-first world where not many people click, and when they click it's because of mine and other people's fat thumbs. And then the other thing as well is, the latest projection for 2017 is $16.4 billion worth of click fraud. That's 20% of the entire digital global spend. And I share that with you again because it's another demonstration of the gaps in the data that's available to us, because there's pretty significant data pollution, because if half the ads that are served are not seen, I remember picking myself up from the floor when Google was the one that told us that half of the ads served online weren't seen, and then $17 billion worth of click fraud. So when you're looking at online browser buyer clicking, consuming content, how much of that is your iRobot vacuum cleaner, and how much of that is an actual real person? So LAZYMATION, again, a little bit of a bold statement. I'm a slight contrarian on these things. We do spend a lot of time on programmatic and making sure that we're getting the best possible yield from programmatic. If I can't sell it direct to a brand in a brilliant and meaningful way, I am happy to get something from it in the programmatic ecosystem. However, magical moments of marketing are less likely to come from mass standardization and mass automation. Automation and standardization makes targeting buying easier. It just doesn't make it better or necessarily more efficient. And then the other company I'm a little bit fascinated with, and I love what they've done to retail, is Etsy. So I think that certainly in my lifetime, as a young kid growing up in Ireland, the idea of handcrafting and artisans and things that were being custom made, and I think I saw a sign recently that said, "Tailor-made never goes out of fashion." I remember I got to write that one down. So the other thing is that I would say that once you get the data, once you've analyzed the data, once you've generated the insights, and you're using location data, you're taking into account the platform mindset, I'm not sure that the best next thought is, okay, now how do I plug this into a programmatic network and spit out tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of impressions. Not that it doesn't work, by the way, it's just, low to no engagement is the accepted standard in the digital space. You get 10% of people to click on anything in the digital space and you get yourself a promotion. So the idea of Etsy, the idea of handcrafted campaigns where the brand, the agency, and GasBuddy, we have a lot of these going on right now. We have intentionally, over the past 24 months, reduced our reliance on programmatic revenue by nearly 400%. Because the other thing is that what we quickly realized is that, yes, our yield on that inventory was dramatically lower, but the money was so easy. You just plug it in and in the money came. But once we monitored about the consumer experience, how was our in-app experience when, it's either the silhouette, a dancing guy telling you about the mortgage rates, or some other irrelevant ad that, was not speaking to you, but really was taking away from the experience within the app. We've intentionally now, we're going to agency, brand to brand, leveraging our data, leveraging our insights, and we're saying to them, look, if you want to buy us programmatically, thank you very much. You plug your pipes into our pipes, we can do a private network. But if we want to set the world on fire, and if you set yourself on fire, the world will come to see you burn, then we want to sit down, we want to figure out, why do people come to GasBuddy? What is their mindset? Why are they engaging? We don't, the customer doesn't care about GasBuddy, the customer doesn't care about your brand, they care about what we're going to do for them. And, you know, in the voice of GasBuddy, we look at the data, we look at the insights, we look at the impact we can make, and we pick the right time and the right voice contextually, and we're really creating phenomenal results with the campaigns that we're building. Where are we going next? So again, here's a great example of how when you start finding, analyzing, discovering the first-party data that you have on your customers, it's game-changing. And it was for us at GasBuddy. So about 2 years ago, we hired a data scientist. We're doing all the things that other brands are doing, where we're bringing people much smarter than us into the business and saying, hey, we have a whole load of data. It's in a couple of different buckets. We're not really sure that we have. We want to analyze it because we want to use that data to make our business better. That was really the motive. But once we actually went in and we looked, you know, based on the 70 million app downloads, it's an always-on app, we get 750 million location pings per day. We were like, wow, we get 110 location pings per customer per day. I mean, we kind of knew this, but once we actually saw the numbers, and once we actually see these feeds coming in, and once we had a partner like Cubic who gave us, literally using AI and other levels of intelligence and analyzing and insight, these little, I call them McNuggets, you know, serving us these phenomenal McNuggets of information back about our customers. The other thing as well was ratings and reviews. We're like, oh, it's so weird. The GasBuddy customer, on average, we get 3 million price reports, ratings, and reviews every single day. And we're thinking, ratings and reviews are really interesting, but the ratings and reviews weren't on us. The ratings and reviews were on our customers, who are the fuel and retail brands. And what also was interesting is that for anybody that pays attention to the search world, if you look at the level of signal effect that Google now gives to ratings and reviews, it really has a big impact on how your business is being searched and found and pressed upon. And in this case, it goes back to first-party data. Ratings and reviews is, in some sense, a first-party data. And in many cases, people don't even know the different areas of the world and digital ecosystem and others where their business is being rated and reviewed. And GasBuddy was one of those. And then we get 707 million annual price reports. It's an extraordinary number. GasBuddy is a 17-year-old business. We're almost as old as the internet. And the fact that we get 3 million price reports a day blows my mind. But the discovery from our first-party data was not so much valuable to us, which it was, but was dramatically more valuable to the actual business that we were serving. So what we've done with our first-party data is that we've made it available through a SaaS platform. It's the finest example I currently have of great second-party data, is where we make all that data available to the fuel and convenience store business on a SaaS platform, where they can go in and they can see what's going on at each and every one of the 157,000 gas stations around the country. Remember, 157,000 gas stations that are doing almost $600 billion in revenue. It's a really, really big market. And I've sat in meetings with these companies where when we show them their data, they're absolutely blown away. So second-party data, which I'm going to get to next, can be extraordinarily valuable because you can find out things about your business and about your actual best customers that not only you won't know, but you might be very surprised to find out. So all of your time should be spent on first-party data. Once you've got that journey figured out, you should then really switch to second-party data and where are your customers spending a lot of their time when they're not with you? Who has data that would be relevant to your business where you could go and work with that brand. Again, I gave the quick example of the airline and the hotel business where you can build truly meaningful moments of impact based on the insights that you generate. Where do we go next? So data Schmata, and by the way, the headline is because every time I go into a meeting with the vendor or someone we work with, I always kind of say data Schmata because every conversation, it goes like this. One line of code, we're going to change your business, we're going to give you all the data and all the customers you ever, and your revenue is going to go through the roof. By the way, it's never one line of code. Everybody knows that. And number two, and maybe I'm a little foolish, I'm still waiting for the partner or the vendor to come in who gives me that switch, that I switch it, and our revenue just starts 10xing, 20xing. And nobody I know in any business across any category has found that partner, whether it's data, whether it's programmatic, that you plug in, and all of a sudden it changes your business forever. So it's a pretty significant journey. Like I said earlier, in the words of Jeff Bezos, it's still day one on data. I think if you're not leveraging location data, even if you don't necessarily currently append it to a campaign, the idea where you can figure out that this customer that shops with me, what other preferences do they actually have based on their real-world behavior. First-party data is king. I wouldn't have another thought about data till you had that figured out. And also, second-party data is huge. There was a time, certainly when I think back to my early days, where we knew there were brands and businesses and platforms that had data on our customers that we would have loved to got, and you couldn't get it. I mean, people would, hold on to that data, and you couldn't pry it either with a weapon or a big check. Whereas today, it's completely different. I mean, the amount of times now that we spend deduping our audience with another audience to figure out what customers we duplicate, what customers we don't duplicate, and the ability to be able to build campaigns that focus on loyal, lapsed, and conquest, not just in online behavior, but also on physical, real-world behavior. It really is a game changer, and some of the early campaigns, and it's still early days for GasBuddy that we're doing for our partners, are game changing. Insight to impact. Automation and programmatic, it's a fascinating business. I feel every time I got it 5% figured out, it all changes again. The amount of time that one spends figuring out a programmatic waterfall, and then you sort of put it in place, and then next week you're told, well, that's not what people are doing anymore, we're now doing this. So the ball is moving really, really quickly, and I would strongly suggest that what's new is old. When I look at Amazon Prime right now, and I look at delivery and everything and anything being shipped to my home, and I remember having that moment of thinking, oh, it's really interesting. When I was a kid growing up in Ireland, the milkman used to bring the milk. He used to have a guy that brought vegetables. There was a coal man. I was like, I had Amazon Prime when I was 10. So again, using that as the example of, I kind of think when the crowd is going one way, it's always good to stop and say, hey, are there advantages for me to go the other way, where people are not going? So while the crowd is rushing towards mass automation and mass standardization, I think the huge opportunities, once you have the data, once you have the insight, and you know what your action is, look beyond the banner, work much, much closer with partners. I'm not going to spend any time talking about the kind of real chaos that's in the digital ecosystem, a little bit been led by the Procter & Gamble, where people are saying, hey, enough is enough, 0.03% click-through rates, and stodgy, scary data where, I don't know where this data is coming from. There was another big headline, if anybody saw it, where a very big brand is suing another company for serving its ads on the wrong platform. So a lot of data pollution. And then my final point, before I get to a couple of quick questions, if there are any, is find your data buddy. The second data party business is huge. I am delighted right now at GasBuddy, the effect that we're having on the business that we're in, the data that we've made available. And by the way, GasBuddy's been around for 17 years. We've had most of this data for most of this time, but it's now freely available. So that's it. Any questions, comments, smart remarks?
Any case studies?
I think we have to have any case studies?
Sorry, my name is Yuri. Do you have any case studies of custom-tailored publisher campaign?
We have many. We have absolutely many. I'm not going to get into all of them right now. I know there's one that we will be releasing with a partner, Intuit. Again, it was one of those insights that somewhere along the journey, one of the things we discovered about our audience is that nearly 20% of our audience were self-employed drivers. 1099 drivers, Lyft drivers, Uber drivers. We hadn't really known that we had such a significant portion of drivers, and that data and that insight, by the way, didn't turn into a programmatic campaign. It turned into a big original content campaign with our partner that has produced beyond best-in-class results. But anybody that's interested, I can share lots of other case studies with you. Any other questions? And then I think we're almost out of... One other question, then we're out of time.
You alluded to this process during your presentation, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the process in terms of your selection of cubics versus their competitors.
Yeah, so anybody that spent any amount of time looking at location data, I mean, accuracy is the big problem. I mean, there are a lot of data partners out there that, when we were looking at what they did, instead of getting me at Starbucks, they were getting me in Victoria's Secret. That was kind of awkward. So for us, number one, I don't know how much this was, for us, there are things like battery drain. You know, once we put other code in, we have to sort of figure out that these location pings, we really can't be draining your battery. Accuracy was key. We found through a lot of due diligence that Cubic was best in class. Also, they've got every possible certification on how they collect their data. They're sort of really good ethical players. It's a primary pillar of their business, that they only work with partners, that they collect the data upfront in a knowing way, and working with consumer. And then the brain of their business, you know, the artificial intelligent machine that's going in the background, that's crunching these numbers and generating those insights, and also their platform. You know, I go back to things like Tableau, and no offense to anybody from or use Tableau, but I've been in businesses where we got software that would analyze data, and then I felt like at the company it was like 10 sheep looking into a black hole. We're like, nobody knew how to use it. A lot of it ends up being shelfware. So the idea that we have a best-in-class partner that's collecting, analyzing our data for us is 1,000 times better than us trying to do it on themselves. So there are many good players in the space. For us, by far and away, Cubic was the best. So we're clear out of time. Thank you.